Hello there. So in my earlier videos regarding cellular respiration, we had talked about the basics of respiration and the difference between anaerobic and aerobic respiration, the basics, and then we had a discussion over glycolysis process. We have seen how the one molecule of glucose, it gets converted into two molecules of pyruvic acid in glycolysis process. Okay, so in this video we are going to talk about specifically the details of anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration, the first thing that comes in our mind when we talk about anaerobic respiration, that it is the one that is going to occur in the absence of oxygen. So there is no oxygen going to be there in the environment, and also it is the one where incomplete oxidation of respiratory substrate takes place, right? So whenever the respiratory substrate, they are going to oxidize incompletely, that process specifically is also known as fermentation. So what is the process of fermentation? Fermentation is where respiratory substrates are incompletely oxidized. Now, depending what are the products of this fermentation process and in which cell this fermentation process is occurring, the fermentation is actually of two types. The very first one is alcoholic fermentation, and another type is lactic acid fermentation. So in the case of alcoholic fermentation is going to occur in yeast cell. It is the one that occurs in yeast cell, while lactic acid fermentation, it takes place in animal muscle cells. Okay, so both the type of fermentation comes under anaerobic respiration only. So both the type of fermentation is going to occur when there is either absence or lack of oxygen in the cell. So let us understand how these processes are going to occur and what actually happens during fermentation process. So if you remember, I told you during glycolysis process that glycolysis process is the one that is common to, or it is a common pathway in anaerobic or aerobic respiration. Whether the respiration is aerobic type or anaerobic type, the glycolysis will remain common. So anaerobic respiration, talking about anaerobic respiration, and in this one also the process it starts from glycolysis only. So here I can write one molecule of glucose is going to get converted into two molecules of pyruvic acid, and this is the process of glycolysis. Right? And if you remember, during glycolysis, the net gain of ATP was 2 ATP, and also there was production of two molecules of NADH plus H plus. So two molecules of NADH were being produced there and two molecules of ATP. So this whole process is glycolysis, which is the first step of anaerobic type of respiration as well as aerobic. Now, once this pyruvic acid is being formed, then depending that in which cell this reaction is occurring and what are the conditions, the pyruvic acid is going to get lead into further process. And since we are talking about anaerobic conditions, so also यहाँ पे here the oxygen will be lacking. So during absence of oxygen, and if these reactions are occurring in yeast cell, in yeast cell, so what is going to happen, these two molecules of pyruvic acid, they are going to get converted into two molecules of acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde by undergoing a process known as decarboxylation. So decarboxylation means what? It will be removing carbon dioxide. So since two molecules of pyruvic acid are involved here, so from one molecule of pyruvic acid, one molecule of CO2 is being removed. So from two molecules of pyruvic acid, two molecules of CO2 are being removed, and this process is going to happen under enzyme known as pyruvic acid. Since decarboxylation is happening, so pyruvic acid decarboxylase enzyme. Okay, and by undergoing pyruvic acid, by undergoing decarboxylation process, it gets converted into acetaldehyde. Now this acetaldehyde ultimately going to get converted into two molecules of ethanol. Again under the presence of enzyme alcohol, since ethanol is being formed here, which is an alcohol, so alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme. And during this process, what is happening, this NADH that was being produced during glycolysis process, it is actually getting utilized here. So NADH is going to get converted into, or get converted back to NAD+. And since two molecules are involved, so two molecules of NADH are going to get utilized. So whatever NADH was being formed during glycolysis process, it is being utilized here. Okay, so this type, since this type of fermentation we are getting, in this type of fermentation we are getting carbon dioxide as final product and ethanol as final product. So we are getting alcohol as final product. So this type of fermentation is known as alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation. Since the last product, the final product is in alcohol here. Okay, now another type of fermentation, let us talk about another type of fermentation. So this was the condition when it was occurring in yeast cell. Now if this reaction is occurring in human muscle cell or animal muscle cell, then what is going to happen? Then this pyruvic acid is actually going to get converted directly into lactic acid. So two molecules of pyruvic acid are going to get converted into two molecules of lactic acid, again in the presence of enzyme. Since lactic acid is being formed here, so the enzyme will be lactic acid dehydrogenase, or simply lactate dehydrogenase enzyme. And again here also this step, it requires the conversion of NADH into NAD+. So two molecules of NADH get converted into two molecules of NAD+. So whatever NADH is what was being produced during glycolysis process, again during lactic acid fermentation as well, it is getting utilized. Since the final product is lactic acid, this whole fermentation process is also known as lactic acid fermentation. So two type of fermentation we had talked about. One is alcoholic fermentation, while other one is lactic acid fermentation, and it is occurring in, the lactic acid fermentation is occurring in muscle cells. So you must be thinking how muscle cells is lacking in oxygen, since we actually normally do aerobic type of respiration. But what happens, children, during heavy exercise, when we are running and breathing very fast, what happens? We require a lot of energy at a time of heavy lifting or something. We require a lot of energy. At that time, all the oxygen is in our body, if it is being utilized, and there will be a condition where the oxygen is lacking in our body. At that time, in human muscle, this lactic acid fermentation is going to happen. Okay, and the last thing about anaerobic respiration, that what is the net gain of ATP during anaerobic respiration? If we just look at the whole process of anaerobic respiration, so it starts from glycolysis, and depending on which type of cell it is happening in, it can either be alcoholic fermentation or lactic acid fermentation. But you can just think, you can just see that in this process, after pyruvic acid formation, there is no production of ATP happening. The only ATP that was being produced, it was the one that was being produced during glycolysis process, right? So the net gain of ATP during anaerobic respiration is just 2 ATP. It is just 2 ATP, right? Also, whatever NADH was being produced during glycolysis process, it was being utilized here. So no use of NADH, like no gain from NADH. Whatever was being produced, it is being reutilized here. So the only thing that we are getting is 2 ATP, that too that was produced during glycolysis process. So net gain from anaerobic, the whole anaerobic respiration, it is 2 ATP. So this is it for anaerobic respiration, and in my next video I'm going to talk about aerobic type of respiration. So I hope you liked the video, and stay tuned for the next video. Then I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye, take care.